Welcome to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, Billy Harper, his life and times and best albums. On this hour, we're going to be talking about more of his best albums of all time. Here's a quick recap of what we're going to be talking about on this hour. The first album is called Soul of an Angel, released in 2000. This album is a combination of religious and spiritual themes, and it all comes together with Billy Harper's unique style, majestic, swelling, heavy and expansive. Knowledge of Self was released in 1976. This one's a very groovy album. Everybody's spot on and the solos are amazing. Love on the Sudan was released in 1977. Another fire and brimstone album from Harper, taking us into the twilight zone of jazz. The melodies ebb and fall are spellbinding. And Live on Tour in the Far East, released in 1995. This album was recorded during a live performance in Taiwan. There's 4 pieces here and they form a cohesive performance. So that was a quick recap of all the albums we are going to be talking about on this hour, and you're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. We'll be right back after some music. Stay tuned. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, Billy Harper, his life and times and best albums. On this hour, more of his best albums of all time. The first album is called Soul of an Angel, released in 2000. Billy Harper's tenor saxophone playing is legendary. His band is also legendary, featuring trumpeter Dr. Eddie Henderson, pianist Francisca Tanksley, bassist Clarence C., and drummer Newman Taylor Baker. So this album is a combination of religious and spiritual themes, and it all comes together with Billy Harper's unique style, majestic, swelling, heavy and expansive. The opening track, Thine is the Glory, is a beautiful trumpet solo. Credence, a lilting nostalgic harmony. And It Came Upon a Midnight Clear has all the elements of Billy Harper's saxophone playing. Let the Voices Sing is another standout track in this album with bluesy themes and horn music. One of Harper's best albums, and the synchronization of the bandmates and improvisation is also great. Knowledge of Self is the next album, released in 1967. So this album has everything Billy ever needed to make a great album. A great groove and a hook, and a great band that could bring his innovative ideas to life through their music. And the time to bring it all to pass. His songs typically were best when he had time to bring out their flavor, a bit like another jazz great, Pharoah Sanders. Pharoah would slowly build up his sound as the instrumentals added on, and then when everybody was speaking, Sanders would join in with his saxophone. Harper follows the same style in this album, waiting for everybody to build up the music and then joining in on saxophone. For instance, the opening title track. Harper starts off with his unique saxophone melodies, and the band slowly builds on it. One of his best songs in the album, and especially the bass background music. Everybody's spot on, the solos are amazing. Whenever the energy peaks, it goes on increasing. When it can't go further, it does. Nearly 19 minutes of Harper at his peak, a must-have for fans. The second side of the album is the inverse. It slowly brings the momentum back to the flow. The song Inside is one such example. Apart from one place where it takes a break for a bass solo, it's pure passion. The rhythm section is fine and Harper compliments everybody, proving his saxophone prowess. Love on the Sudan was released in 1977, another fire and brimstone album from Harper, taking us into the twilight zone of 70s jazz. The opening song, Priestess, is a riveting song. It's one of the standout tracks from the album, inspiring everybody with its mood. The melodies ebb and fall are spellbinding. This one's a very spiritual jazz sort of album. It opens up that connection between the music and the listener, taking you on a spellbinding ride. Live on Tour in the Far East was released in 1995. This album was recorded during a live performance in Taiwan. There's 4 pieces here and they form a cohesive performance. And it's a great snapshot of Harper performing with his band in a live tour. Harper and Henderson excel on the song Priestess in the opening track. Harper tries to bring out his magic of Coltrane style melodies with his cover of Trying to Make Heaven My Home. He's joined by a bluesy piano backdrop by Francisca Tanksley. There's a jazz classic, My Funny Valentine, performed together by the entire band. Destiny is Young, a horn melody fanfare complemented by piano and bass music. Harper's saxophone playing is hard-edged and sharp on this album. A very engaging, delightful album. So that was some insight into more of Billy Harper's best albums of all time, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. You can check out my YouTube channel for archives of today's show on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. Here's Billy Harper with Dance Eternal Spirits Dance. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. Now for some festival news. The Iowa City Jazz Festival is around the corner. It's taking place July 5th to 7th, and it's a great way to celebrate jazz during the weekend. Featuring a mashup of weekend jazz extravaganza. 3 days of live performances. The festival features both national and international jazz stars and up-and-coming artists. There's also great food and beverages available on premises. The festival is taking place in downtown Iowa this weekend. For more information, please call 319-337-7944. So that was some trending festival news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. We're going for a short break. When we come back, we're going to be talking about more of Billy Harper's best albums of all time. Stay tuned. This is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, Billy Harper, his life and times and best hits. And on this hour, we're going to be talking about more of his best albums of all time. Here's a quick recap of some of the albums we're going to be talking about on this hour. The first album is called Awakening, released in 1979. This one's one of Billy's most groundbreaking, innovative albums. There's 3 extended pieces in this album, and each of them showcase his depth of study of the styles of John Coltrane. Also, his acumen at blues and Eastern music. Destiny Is Yours was released in 1990. This album brings out the essence of the tenor mastery that characterized Harper's saxophone playing. It's full of solid arrangements and beautiful solos. One feature of this album is the innovativeness with which even old classics are portrayed. Another feature, Harper's unique take on the ballads. And Billy Harper Quintet in Europe, released in 1979. This album was Harper's debut release on the Italian Soul Note label. The album went on to become a massive success and got him a lot of critical reviews from the jazz world. The album has influences of McCoy Tyner and John Coltrane's style of playing. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, Billy Harper, his life and times and best hits. And on this hour, we're going to be talking about more of his best albums of all time. The first album is called Awakening, released in 1979. This is one of Billy Harper's most groundbreaking, innovative albums. There's 3 extended pieces in this album, and each of them showcases depth of study of the styles of John Coltrane. Also, he's acumen at blues and Eastern music. Soran Bushy Bee is a 12-minute song, while Cry of Hunger goes on for more than 20 minutes. Fred Hirsch on piano, Louis Spears on bass, and Horace Arnold on drums. There's Asian and Senegalese folk themes in the music. Also in this album, the Billy Harper Quartet were experimenting with groundbreaking themes at the time. For example, the synchronization between Harper and Hirsch on piano and sax, very intimate and intellectual interplay. There's swinging tempos that move from Malian folk to resonant gospel blues, featuring Harper's horn melodies and Spears' bass. It's one of the best avant-garde jazz albums from the 70s. Destiny Is Yours was released in 1990. This album brings out the essence of the tenor mastery that characterized Harper's saxophone playing. It's full of solid arrangements and beautiful solos. Harper's style of play is like a blend of Wayne Shorter and John Coltrane styles. So overall, he brings a unique style and sound to this album. Impressive technicality combined with a broad range of emotion in his playing. One feature of this album is the innovativeness with which even old classics are portrayed, for instance, songs like My Funny Valentine. The standout feature of this track is how the band managed to infuse it with a different sort of emotional spectrum than previous renditions by other artists. Also another feature, Harper's unique take on the ballads. The group typically slowly build up each piece and then they blossom forth into very dynamic playing. Some of the best tracks from this album, If Only One Could See, One That Makes the Rain Stop, My Funny Valentine, and Destiny Is Yours. Billy Harper Quintet in Europe was released in 1979. This album was Harper's debut release on the Italian Soul Note label. Ironically, the title Live in Europe is a bit misleading. This was not taken from a live performance in a European tour. It was actually recorded during a studio session in Milan. So Harper had 2 debut releases for different labels. The first was Black Saint, released on Black Saint Records, and the second was this album. It was the first album released on Soul Note. Black Saint and Soul Note were actually sister labels, and the producer for Black Saint Records, upon seeing the success of Black Saint the album, decided to premiere another Billy Harper album on Soul Note Records, and it worked again. The album went on to become a massive success and got him a lot of critical reviews from the jazz world. Billy was at his best at the time of this album release. A very consistent career in jazz, and this was one of his best efforts. This album is typical of most of his long plays, consisting of just 3 tracks but very long ones. The opening song, Priestess, has a great piano intro. The saxophone and drum duet on Cavalry is outstanding. The rhythm section to this album were just starting out, but they are brilliant. Horace Arnold's drum beat is very dynamic, keeping up the momentum and leading the performance. The performance is grounded in Louis Spears' epic bass lines. Also, the album has influences of McCoy Tyner and John Coltrane styles of playing. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, Billy Harper, his life and times and best albums. We've come to an end of today's episode of the Jazz Update, so now let's recap what we were talking about on today's program. First, for a quick recap of Billy Harper's biography. So Billy Harper is one of the most innovative jazz artists of his time. His style is diverse and varied, from bop to free jazz. He started out at age 5 singing in choirs. By age 14, he'd formed his first band, the Billy Harper Quintet. He went on to graduate in music and began winning numerous awards for his performances. In 1966, he moved to New York City and began performing and touring alongside some of the jazz legends at the time like Jill Evans, Max Roach, Thad Jones, Art Blakey, and more. Throughout the 60s and 70s, he toured the world with these artists. He then formed his own band, the Billy Harper Quintet, in 1966. His album released with the band reflects his love of both spiritual themes and jazz music. His debut album was a hit right off the bat when it was released in 1973. It was called Capra Black. Another one of his most popular albums, Black Saint, released in 1976. Other notable albums include Soul of an Angel, Knowledge of Self, Love on the Sudan, and more. Harper said of his albums, they had a greater purpose, to heal and to be uplifting. Harper's awards include 2 awards from the National Endowment of the Arts and an International Critics Award for tenor saxophone playing. So now let's talk about some of his best albums of all time. Capra Black, released in 1973, is the first album. This album was recorded in the early 70s. The bandmates on this album production were stylistically diverse. The setlist in this album was typical of Harper's style, jazz influenced with spiritual themes. Also, this album was his debut release and it garnered him a lot of attention from the jazz world. Black Saint was released in 1975. It was his first album released on the Black Saint label. And for many of his fans, Black Saint is synonymous with Billy Harper's legacy. This album is like a cross-section of everything Billy Harper. It gives us an insight into his style and is one of the best spiritual or modal jazz albums of his compilation. There's also some of his own compositions here. Love on the Sudan was released in 1977, another fire and brimstone album from Harper, taking us into the twilight zone of 70s jazz. The melodies ebb and fall are spellbinding. Live on Tour in the Far East, released in 1995. This album was recorded during a live performance in Taiwan. There's 4 pieces here and they form a cohesive performance. It's a great snapshot of Harper performing with his band in a live tour. So that was a quick recap of everything that we discussed on today's episode of the Jazz Update. Billy Harper, his life and times and best albums. And on that note, we've come to an end of today's episode of the Weekend Jazz Update with Joshua De Silva. I'll see you again next week. Have a great week ahead.